My dentist saved my life with a piece of paper and 6 words I will never forget. I was sitting in the back of a police car outside the dental office, wrapped in a thin gray blanket that did nothing to stop my shaking. Through the window, I watched 2 officers escort a man out of the building in handcuffs. His head was down, his wrists pinned behind his back, but I knew exactly who he was. 3 hours earlier, he had kissed me goodbye in that same parking lot and told me he would be waiting when I was done. 3 hours earlier, I thought he was my boyfriend. I thought he was the kind, patient man I had been dating for 3 months. I thought I was lucky to have found someone so good. Now, I was watching him get shoved into the back of a squad car while a detective explained to me that his real name wasn't Marcus Webb, that he was wanted in 2 states, and that I was never supposed to leave that dental office alive. The only reason I'm here to tell this story is because my dentist noticed something I completely missed and found a way to warn me without saying a word. I need to take you back to before that morning so you can understand how blind I really was. My name is Brooke, and at 25 years old, I thought I had a pretty good life figured out. I worked as an office administrator at a real estate company in Madison, Wisconsin, handling paperwork and scheduling and keeping the agents organized. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and my coworkers were nice. I lived alone in a small 1-bedroom apartment near downtown, close enough to walk to the coffee shops and restaurants I loved. My routine was simple and predictable. Work from 9 to 5, evening runs along the lake path when the weather was nice, dinner with friends on Friday nights, and a phone call with my mother every Sunday without fail. My mother, Janine, lived about 2 hours away in the small town where I grew up. She had raised me and my older sister mostly on her own. After our father walked out when I was 7, she worked double shifts as a hotel housekeeper for years to keep us fed and clothed, and even now that we were grown, she never stopped worrying about us. Every Sunday call included at least one reminder to lock my doors, to be careful walking alone at night, to trust my instincts if something felt wrong. I always told her she worried too much. I always told her I was fine. My sister Natalie was 30 and living in Minneapolis with her husband and their 2-year-old daughter. We were close in the way sisters are when life gets busy, trading texts more often than phone calls, sending pictures and voice messages when we couldn't find time to actually talk. She had her hands full with the baby, and I didn't want to bother her with every little detail of my life. Looking back, I wish I had told her more. I wish I had told someone. 3 months before that Thursday morning, I met a man at a bookstore downtown. I was browsing the fiction section when he reached for the same book I was about to pick up. We laughed about it, started talking, and ended up getting coffee at the cafe next door. His name was Marcus Webb, or at least that's what he told me. He was in his mid-30s, tall with dark hair and a warm smile that made me feel comfortable right away. He said he worked in pharmaceutical sales and traveled a lot for his job, which explained why he was only free to see me a few times a week. Marcus was everything I thought I wanted. He was patient and attentive, always remembering small details I mentioned and bringing them up later. He never pushed me to move faster than I was comfortable with. He asked about my family, my job, my dreams for the future. He seemed genuinely interested in who I was as a person. After months of terrible dates and disappointing relationships, I thought I had finally found someone real. The Thursday of my dental appointment started like any other day. I woke up, got dressed for work, and checked my phone to find a text from Marcus. "Still picking you up at 9:30 for your appointment. Can't wait to take you to lunch after." My car was in the shop getting new brakes, and Marcus had offered to drive me to my checkup. I thought it was sweet. I thought it was the kind of thing a good boyfriend does. He picked me up right on time, driving a silver sedan I had ridden in dozens of times before. We chatted easily on the way to the dental office, talking about a movie we wanted to see that weekend, and a restaurant he wanted to try. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. The dental office was in a small medical plaza about 15 minutes from my apartment. I had been going to the same dentist for 3 years, a kind man named Dr. Peter Aguilar, who had a gentle way of explaining things that made me feel at ease. His hygienist Rosa always remembered details about my life and asked follow-up questions from our previous conversations. It felt like a place where people actually cared about their patients. Marcus parked the car and walked me inside, his hand resting lightly on my lower back. The waiting room was small and quiet, with a handful of chairs and a television mounted on the wall, playing the morning news on mute. Marcus settled into a seat near the window and pulled out his phone. "I'll be right here when you're done," he said, smiling up at me. "Take your time." I smiled back, grateful to have someone so thoughtful in my life. Then I followed Rosa through the door and down the hallway to the examination room, completely unaware that in less than 30 minutes, everything I thought I knew would fall apart. Subscribe for more stories and tell me where you're watching from. The appointment started exactly the way it always did. Rosa led me to the examination chair and draped a paper bib across my chest. She asked about my job, whether we had been busy lately, and I told her about the new listings our agents had picked up. She mentioned her daughter was starting soccer and how the practice schedule was already driving her crazy. Normal conversation, normal morning. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling tiles while she began cleaning my teeth, the familiar scrape of metal against enamel filling the quiet room. About 15 minutes in, Dr. Aguilar entered. He was wearing his usual white coat, his graying hair neatly combed, reading glasses perched on his nose. He smiled at me and asked how I was doing, then pulled on a fresh pair of gloves and began his examination. "Let's see how everything's looking," he said, leaning over me with a small mirror and probe. I opened my mouth and let him work, my eyes wandering around the room the way they always did during these appointments. The ceiling had a water stain in one corner I had never noticed before. The poster on the wall showed a cartoon tooth holding a toothbrush and smiling. Rosa was organizing instruments on a tray nearby, humming softly under her breath. Then something changed. Dr. Aguilar paused mid-examination, his tools still resting against my lower teeth. He wasn't looking at my mouth anymore. His eyes had shifted to something behind me, toward the small rectangular window in the door that looked out into the hallway. I couldn't see what he was looking at from my position, but I noticed the change in his expression, a subtle tightening around his eyes, a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. He resumed the examination after a moment, but his movements were different now, slower, more deliberate, like he was buying time. "Everything looks good so far," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Rosa, can you hand me the periodontal probe?" Rosa passed him the instrument, and I saw her glance toward the door too, just for a second. Then she looked away, her face carefully blank. A few minutes later, Dr. Aguilar set down his tools and stepped back from the chair. He picked up a small notepad from the counter, the kind dentists use to write down treatment notes or referral information. He scribbled something quickly, then turned and held it up so only I could see. 6 words written in blue ink. "Nod if you need help. Don't speak." My heart stopped. I read the words twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of them. This had to be some kind of mistake, some kind of strange joke I didn't understand. But when I looked up at Dr. Aguilar's face, there was no trace of humor. His eyes were locked on mine, calm but urgent, waiting for my response. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know why he was asking. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them making sense. Was there something wrong with me medically? Had he found something during the exam? Why couldn't I speak? Then he glanced toward the door again, just for a fraction of a second, and I understood. This wasn't about me. This was about someone else. Someone out there. My stomach dropped. I nodded. Dr. Aguilar wrote something else on the notepad and showed it to me. "The man who brought you. Do you know him well?" "Marcus." He was asking about Marcus. I hesitated. 3 months felt like a long time when you were in the middle of it, but sitting there in that chair, I suddenly realized how little I actually knew. I knew what Marcus had told me about himself. I knew the version of him he had chosen to show me. But did I really know him? I shook my head slowly. No, I didn't know him well. Not really. Dr. Aguilar leaned closer to me, pretending to examine my back molars. His face was inches from mine, and when he spoke, his voice was so quiet I could barely hear him. "Someone dangerous is in my waiting room. I've seen his face before. On the news last week. Stay calm. I've already called the police. We're going to keep you safe." The room tilted around me. I gripped the armrests of the chair so hard my knuckles turned white. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to get up, to get out of this building. But I couldn't move. The man I had been dating, the man I had trusted, the man who was sitting 30 feet away waiting to take me to lunch, was dangerous, and he was between me and the only exit. My entire body went cold, like someone had poured ice water into my veins. I wanted to sit up. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream and demand answers. But Dr. Aguilar's hand was on my shoulder, gentle but firm, keeping me in place. His eyes told me everything I needed to know. Stay still. Stay quiet. Trust us. He straightened up and spoke in a normal voice, loud enough to carry through the thin walls if anyone was listening. Everything looks great, Brooke. Rosa is going to take a few x-rays just to make sure we're not missing anything, and then we'll get you scheduled for your next cleaning. His tone was so casual, so routine, that for a moment I almost believed nothing was wrong, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flicking toward the door. He was acting. He was putting on a performance to buy time. Rosa moved to my side, her face calm and professional, even though I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the x-ray equipment. She guided me out of the main chair and toward the machine in the corner of the room, positioning the heavy lead apron over my chest. As she leaned close to adjust the sensor in my mouth, she whispered directly into my ear, "The police are on their way. We need to keep you back here until they arrive. Just breathe. We're not going to let anything happen to you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My throat felt like it was closing up, and tears were burning at the corners of my eyes. I blinked them back and focused on breathing. In and out. In and out. Don't panic. Don't fall apart. Dr. Aguilar excused himself, saying he needed to check on paperwork for another patient. I watched him leave the room, his footsteps calm and unhurried, like this was just another Thursday morning. I learned later what he actually did. He walked to the front desk and spoke quietly with the receptionist, a young woman named Heather, who had only been working there for a few months. He told her to lock the main entrance quietly, to make sure no one could leave without going through the back. Then he walked into the waiting room and sat down across from Marcus. They made small talk. Dr. Aguilar asked Marcus how his day was going, mentioned the weather, complained about traffic. He asked if Marcus lived nearby, what he did for work, how long he and I had been together. Marcus answered every question smoothly, charmingly, the way he always did. He had no idea that Dr. Aguilar was stalling, stretching every second while police cars raced toward the building. Back in the examination room, I sat frozen in the x-ray chair, staring at the ceiling without seeing it. Rosa stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. She talked about her daughter's soccer practice, about the weather warming up, about a recipe she wanted to try that weekend. Her voice was light and cheerful, completely at odds with the fear I could see in her eyes. I tried to listen. I tried to focus on her words, but my mind kept spiraling back to Marcus, to the 3 months I had spent with him, to every dinner, every kiss, every night I had let him into my apartment. He knew where I lived. He knew my schedule. He knew which door I used to enter my building and where I parked my car. What had he been planning? What would have happened if Dr. Aguilar hadn't recognized his face? I thought about my mother, sitting in her small house 2 hours away, probably watching morning television and drinking her second cup of coffee. I thought about Natalie in Minneapolis, chasing her toddler around the living room. They had no idea what was happening. They didn't know that right now, in this moment, my life was hanging by a thread. Every second felt like an eternity. I kept waiting to hear footsteps in the hallway, to hear Marcus's voice asking where I was, to hear the door handle turn. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it pulsing in my temples. Then, from somewhere outside, I heard the sound that changed everything. Sirens. Faint at first, then growing louder, getting closer. Rosa squeezed my hand, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself breathe. The sirens stopped right outside the building. I heard car doors slamming, heavy footsteps on pavement, muffled voices giving commands. Rosa kept her hand on my arm, holding me steady in the x-ray chair. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. We just listened, straining to hear what was happening in the waiting room down the hall. The front door opened. I heard Dr. Aguilar's voice, calm and measured, greeting someone. Then other voices, deeper and more authoritative. Police officers. They were inside. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then Marcus spoke, and hearing his voice sent a wave of nausea through my entire body. "I'm sorry. Is there a problem? I'm just waiting for my girlfriend. She's getting her teeth cleaned." His tone was friendly, confused, perfectly innocent. The same voice that had told me he loved spending time with me. The same voice that had whispered goodnight through my phone screen. I wanted to cover my ears and block it out. One of the officers responded, his voice steady but firm. I couldn't make out the exact words, but I heard Marcus's tone shift. The friendliness faded. He started asking questions, demanding to know what was going on, insisting there had been some kind of mistake. Then the shouting started. "Get your hands off me. This is ridiculous. I haven't done anything wrong." A scuffle, the sound of furniture scraping across the floor. More voices, louder now, overlapping, commands being barked. A crash that sounded like a chair tipping over. Rosa pulled me closer, positioning herself between me and the door, as if her body could shield me from whatever was happening out there. I gripped the armrests of the X-ray chair so hard my fingers ached. Every instinct told me to run, to hide, to make myself as small as possible, but there was nowhere to go. Then silence. Heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to stretch on forever. A knock on the examination room door made both of us jump. A woman's voice, calm and professional, called through the wood. "This is Officer Chen with the Madison Police Department. It's safe to come out now." Rosa let out a shaky breath and squeezed my shoulder. She walked to the door and opened it slowly, revealing a female officer in uniform standing in the hallway. The officer looked past Rosa to where I was still sitting in the chair, frozen in place. "Brooke, you can come out. He's in custody." I stood up on legs that felt like they might collapse beneath me. Rosa took my arm and guided me toward the door. Every step felt like walking through water, slow and heavy and unreal. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be my life. We walked down the short hallway toward the waiting room. I don't know what I expected to see, but nothing could have prepared me for the image that greeted me when I turned the corner. Marcus was on the floor, face down, his hands cuffed behind his back. 2 officers stood over him, and a third was speaking into a radio clipped to his shoulder. The chairs in the waiting room had been knocked askew. A magazine rack was tipped over, its contents scattered across the carpet. Dr. Aguilar was standing near the reception desk, his face pale but composed. Heather, the receptionist, was beside him, her eyes wide and her hands pressed over her mouth. Marcus lifted his head as I entered the room. Our eyes met, and I felt something cold and sharp twist in my chest. The warmth I thought I had seen in him was gone. The charming smile, the gentle patience, the kindness that had made me feel so special, all of it had vanished. What looked back at me was flat, empty, and filled with something I can only describe as rage. "Brooke," his voice was eerily calm, almost conversational. "Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them we're together." I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just stared at him, this stranger wearing the face of a man I thought I knew. One of the officers stepped forward and explained what they had found. His real name wasn't Marcus Webb. It was Daniel Fenton. He was wanted in 2 states for assault, stalking, and false imprisonment. There had been 2 other women before me. One had escaped after 3 days. The other had been held for almost 2 weeks. Dr. Aguilar had recognized his face from a news segment that aired the previous week, a warning about a dangerous man still at large. When Marcus walked into the waiting room that morning, Dr. Aguilar knew exactly who he was sitting across from. He excused himself, confirmed his suspicion online, and called 911 while pretending to review patient records. He saved my life by staying calm, by not confronting Marcus directly, by finding a way to warn me without putting anyone else in danger. Daniel Fenton was arrested that morning and charged with stalking, attempted kidnapping, and multiple counts of assault and false imprisonment from his previous victims. The police told me he had been planning what he called a trip for us, a cabin he had rented 3 hours north of Madison, where no one would hear me scream. They found zip ties in his car, duct tape in the trunk, and a bag packed with supplies that made my stomach turn when they described it. He had been patient with me for 3 months because he was waiting for the perfect moment. That Thursday morning, with my car in the shop and no one expecting me anywhere until lunch, was supposed to be it. His trial took place 8 months later in a courtroom downtown. I testified on the 3rd day, sitting in a wooden chair 15 feet away from the man who had held my hand and told me I was special. My voice shook at first, but I forced myself to keep going. I told the jury about the bookstore where we met, the dinners we shared, the texts he sent that made me feel cared for. I told them about the note Dr. Aguilar showed me and the terror I felt when I realized the truth. I didn't look at Daniel while I spoke. I couldn't, but I felt his eyes on me the entire time. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 23 years in prison. The judge called him a predator who used charm as a weapon. She said it was only through the vigilance of a careful observer that another woman was spared. The 2 women Daniel had victimized before me both reached out after the verdict. We met at a small diner halfway between Madison and Milwaukee on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I didn't know what to expect. Part of me was afraid that seeing them would make everything feel more real, more permanent, more impossible to move past. But when I sat down across from them, something shifted inside me. They understood in a way no one else could. They had looked into the same eyes, heard the same lies, trusted the same performance. One of them, a woman named Adrian, told me she still slept with a light on. The other, Kira, said she hadn't been on a date in 2 years. We didn't try to fix each other or offer empty reassurances. We just sat together and let ourselves be understood. We still text sometimes, checking in, reminding each other that we survived. I moved out of my apartment a month after the arrest. I couldn't stay in a place where Daniel knew exactly where I slept, where he had sat on my couch and eaten at my table. My mother wanted me to come home, and for a few weeks I actually considered it, but I wasn't ready to give up my life in Madison. Instead, I found a new apartment in a secure building on the other side of the city, one with a doorman and cameras in every hallway. Natalie drove down from Minneapolis to help me move. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just packed boxes, carried furniture, and stayed with me for a week until I could sleep through the night again. I still go to Dr. Aguilar for my dental checkups. The first time I went back after everything happened, I brought him a card and a gift certificate to a restaurant his wife liked. He tried to refuse it, shaking his head like what he did was nothing special. Anyone would have done the same thing, he said. But I knew that wasn't true. Most people wouldn't have paid close enough attention to recognize a face from a news segment. Most people wouldn't have stayed calm enough to call the police without raising suspicion. Most people would have told themselves it was none of their business and looked away. Dr. Aguilar didn't look away. He put himself between me and a predator, and he did it so quietly that Daniel never even knew it was happening. I think about that every day now, about paying attention, about trusting instincts, about being the kind of person who notices when something isn't right and has the courage to act. I was 3 months into a relationship with a monster, and I had no idea. He was patient, careful, and convincing, but he made one mistake. He walked into a room where someone was watching. A piece of paper and 6 words saved my life. Now I pay attention to everything, and I never ignore the feeling that something is wrong. If you want more stories, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from.